Our first question is from Callum, who asks, how can my local council decide to delay my right to vote and opt to merge into a super council without first getting a consensus of the people who live here? Now, this is related to devolution plans announced by Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, which means that local elections that were due in May in some places are now being postponed in 9 council areas for up to a year. Rachel, remind us what's going on here.
Devolution is what's going on. So the formula to remember is that district councils plus county councils equals or will equal unitary authorities. And it's about sort of stripping out the layers of local government. You've had 2-tier local government, you'll have 1-tier local government. And the idea is that that unitary authority will be more robust and have more power and influence, take away the sort of doubling of bureaucracy and also be able to represent local residents better, perhaps when facing MPs in Westminster.
Megan, is there actually any evidence that unitary authorities, these larger councils, are more effective?
Yeah, so the last time that this kind of happened, that local government was reorganised, was the process was sort of started off in 2021 but concluded in early 2023. So councils in Somerset, Cumbria and North Yorkshire were reorganised into unitary authorities. Now, Somerset Council, which was obviously part of this, has actually since then declared a financial emergency and has been forced to find cuts of £35 million. So,
also worth remembering that the largest unitary authority, which is Birmingham, they're not in a particularly strong financial position, let's put it that way.
Yeah, so I think that rather than reorganisation fixing the problem, and I've written about this for the New Statesman before, I don't necessarily think that in doing this massive programme of reorganisation, the government's taking the right approach to fixing the crisis in councils. It would be better to think about how do councils receive their funding? Can we give them more powers over local taxation and things like that? And also, you know, people on listening to the podcast will have heard me bang on about this so many times, but what are we going to do about social care? Because that's just sucking councils' resources, whether it's a county council, so you're in a 2-tier area, or whether you're in a unitary authority, the problem's still the same.
Megan, you said there that those areas in 2023 were subjected to it. So what is going on in these 9 areas now in 2025? They want this, or it's the government imposing it on them?
I suppose that was maybe me misspeaking there, but yeah, in Cumbria in particular, it did go to consultation and the areas had to apply for it, but there was a lot of sort of back and forth in Cumbria over the exact form the unitary authority would take. So, for example, there was a bit of upset about the fact that the county was split in 2 rather than having a single unitary authority to cover the whole area. So, yeah, people in local government do often enjoy getting messed up in the semantics of things. But yeah, the government has invited areas to apply for this. So subjected was perhaps the wrong word.
Callum is saying very clearly that he hasn't had a say. So obviously hasn't gone to the regular person on the street. Rachel, the Lib Dems are just one other party who are not very happy about this. They've described the plan as a disgraceful stitch-up between Labour and the Conservatives. We were having some chat about this in the office, weren't we, about whether that is fair or if there's actually any advantage to Labour in particular by delaying these elections.
Well, the advantage to Labour is that Labour has a devolution plan, and this is part of it. I think that's the overarching intention of this. In terms of does Labour benefit because the government's quite unpopular, local council elections are always an opportunity for voters who are unhappy with the Westminster government to make their opinions felt. The thing you have to remember is that this set of local elections is really about the Conservatives rather than about Labour. And that's because the last time these council seats were fought was May 2021. It was the heyday of Boris Johnson. There was the vaccine bounce. Labour... Exactly. Who? Labour were like really, really struggling. That was the local elections where there was the Hartlepool by-election and Labour lost it.
And we thought Keir Starmer might go.
We thought Keir Starmer was toast. Yeah, in fact, he very nearly was. It was a very dangerous moment for him. So even though you would normally expect local governments to be a point of danger for the governing party. In this instance, they're much more dangerous for the Conservatives. If these elections are delayed by a year, it's far more Conservative-held council seats that are going to be delayed than Labour-held ones. I think it's about 70 Labour
and about
seats
300,
and about 300 Conservative ones. So, yes, it is true that it benefits both Labour and the Conservatives, but it benefits the Conservatives much more than Labour.
And that understandably or predictably has led to Nigel Farage and saying that these changes are going to damage how well reform can perform because they're riding a wave at the moment.
Yeah, so there aren't going to be elections in Essex and Thurrock are the ones that sort of key reform areas, and they're ones where you can see reform came second, where reform has the most chance. And those ones, yes, are going to be postponed for a year, and who knows what the status of reform will be in a year's time. However, the party that I think is disadvantaged the most is the Liberal Democrats, because there were, South and South East and Hampshire and Surrey and Sussex, like all areas where the Lib Dems were hoping to continue to turn the blue wall yellow or whatever.
Well, I mean, you look at Surrey in the general election, it's completely yellow pretty much.
So Ed Davey and Nigel Farage both have reasons to feel a bit meow about this. But I think Ed Davey has more justification.
I think there's two things here, isn't there, Megan? I mean, you mentioned social care, but there's quite a strong financial argument that this is the right thing to do, isn't it? It's absolutely absurd to hold one set of elections knowing that 12 months later they're kind of redundant.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if they are going to press on with reorganisation, the fact that the government has delayed these elections does make sense. Because elections cost money and they cost time and effort from people working in councils. So perhaps this will be beneficial because it means that the reorganisation process can be done properly and well, and have the amount of breathing space and room it needs to sort of flourish. But yeah, I mean, the Lib Dems, they now have 100 fewer seats to contest, so I can see why they're pretty annoyed about it.
Well, that's the second point, which is democracy. I mean, there's a really interest, as you'd expect, from the Local Government Chronicle, who say that when you have unitary authorities rather than the split that we have now in some areas, it makes it much harder for the smaller parties to become elected. And they also sort of raise this point that it might have devolution, might have the opposite effect that Labour want, in that it actually, disillusions people. They feel they have less say in their local democracy.
I think it depends a lot on how it is done. The argument for it is that bigger, more robust unitary authorities will have more power, influence, ability to kind of stand up for that local area against Westminster. So it's just about how many layers of government that you want, all the way from sort of Westminster MPs down to parish councillors, I guess. But really, as Megan said, it depends entirely on the powers they're given and the money they're given. And that is probably going to be a bigger determiner of whether this works or not than sort of the exact mechanics. It really all comes down to money. But I don't think it is particularly fair either for Ed Davey and Nigel Farage to say this is an attack on democracy, or for Labour and Angela Rayner to say this is really good for local democracy. Like, it really depends on the mechanics, the specifics of it, and ultimately, like, shaking out the exact vehicles of power doesn't really, in and of itself, affect sort of people's democratic right to be heard. It's about, like, who's responsible for what. Basically, I think there's a lot of democracy to go round, and sort of rearranging the pots of democracy is neither giving people more democracy nor taking their democracy away.
England is quite a patchwork of areas and sort of with different needs. You know, you've got rural places and then urban places. Mayoral combined authorities, such as in Manchester, where Andy Burnham is the mayor, have worked really well for urban places, but they haven't necessarily been the best option for more rural areas. For example, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has been beset with sort of issues since its combined authority was created. And I suppose they are sort of different setups in that you've got the county council involved in Cambridgeshire, and in Manchester it's all unitary authorities. But I suppose it's never one size fits all with local government, and you do have to take that into account. And I think what the government here is trying to do is, because they've seen the success of mayors for Labour, they want to spread that out across the country. And I think that it could end up not having quite the effect that they would like it to have.